In the world of ancient games, chess is the undisputed world heavyweight champion. But chess wasn't just invented, it evolved gradually over centuries as it traveled across countries and cultures. But there is one game that is believed to have been the original ancestor, and it's a pretty decent game in and of itself. Ashtapada, this time on the gaming bench. Ashtapada is a race game for 2 to 4 players. You'll need an 8x8 Ashtapada board, which is essentially a chessboard with 16 of the spaces marked with an X. The marked spaces around the perimeter are called castles, and the 4 central squares are called the keep. I made this Ashtapada board. I have another video I'll link down below that shows you how I did it. Each player gets 4 or 5 pieces. It doesn't matter what they are, tokens, seeds, beads, as long as each player's pieces are distinctive from the other players. Traditionally, cowrie shells are used as dice. These are read by counting the number of shell openings that face up, giving players a move between 1 and 4. If all of the shell openings are face down, that counts as an 8. Any kind of binary dice can be used, such as casting sticks or even coins. Now, when talking about the rules of Ashtapada, it's important to note that we really don't know how it was played in antiquity. Scholars have reconstructed a rule set based on the shape of the board, hints in ancient poems and songs, and by looking at the mechanics of other Indian games of roughly the same time period. So, this is our best guess. The goal is to move all your pieces in a spiraling path towards the keep in the center of the board. There are several proposed routes, but all seem to have a player start on the right-hand marked square in front of them, move counterclockwise around the outside perimeter, then, when they return to the first row, change directions and move clockwise until they reach the center. Each player travels the same path, but starting on the marked square on their side of the board. Here's a couple variations in the route, so pick the one that seems the most fun to you. The way the dice work is a little complicated, so pay attention. A player repeatedly throws the dice, writing down the results of each throw until a 2 or 3 is thrown. Once a 2 or 3 is thrown, the dice rolling stops and movement begins. A 1 is required to enter a piece onto the board. On a player's first turn, and only their first turn, any numbers before a 1 are discarded. A piece may enter the board and move in the same turn. On a player's second turn onward, all numbers are written down until a 2 or 3 is thrown. The player can then combine any number of throws to move a piece already on the board. If a 1 is part of the throws, a player can choose to bring a new piece onto the board. And again, a piece can enter the board and move in the same go. Every number in the sequence must be used if possible. Note that the order in which the numbers are thrown doesn't matter. If a player's piece lands exactly on a square with another of their pieces, the player can choose to make these pieces into a twin. Then the 2 pieces move together around the board. This only works for 2 pieces. You can't combine pieces into triplets or quadruplets. Twins can be broken up at any time if you want. If a player's piece lands on an opponent's piece, that piece is knocked off the board and has to re-enter on a subsequent turn. A player who knocks another player off the board receives an immediate extra turn. This is the same as any other turn. Throw the dice until you get a 2 or 3, write down all your numbers, and so on. A piece resting on a castle is immune from being knocked off the board. Multiple players' pieces can all sit on a castle together. Note that when numbers are combined, a piece moves the total sum. For example, if a 2 and a 4 are combined, the piece moves 6, not 2 spaces, then 4 spaces. This means if you land on your own piece in the middle of the move, you can't create a twin. Likewise, you can't knock a player off the board unless their piece is at the end of your move. Only twins can knock off other twins. A single piece landing on twins only shares the space. Players move their pieces around the board until they reach the keep on an exact roll. Even though there's 4 squares in the keep, it's considered one big square. A player has to move all of their pieces into the keep before they can start to bar off. Any twins moving into the keep immediately become singletons again. A roll of 1 is required to bar off a piece from within the keep. First player to get all their pieces off the board wins. Now, racing pieces around a board towards the center seems like it couldn't be further from the game of chess. So, Why is it that any serious history of chess must start with Ashtapada? Ashtapada originated in India, probably around the 2nd or 3rd century BCE. In Sanskrit, the word Ashtapada translates to 8-legged, evoking the number of squares along each side of the board. Like the rules, the history of Ashtapada has been reconstructed by mentions in ancient stories, poems, and songs, as well as numerous paintings and woven rugs that depict the game being played. One of the earliest references we have that probably refers to Ashtapada is from the Dialogues of the Buddha, a sacred text written sometime between 600 and 200 BCE. The writings provide a list of activities of which the Buddha would not play, and instructed his disciples to likewise not play, as he believed them to be a cause for negligence. Whereas some recluses and Brahmins, while living on food provided by the faithful, continue addicted to games and recreations, that is to say, games on boards with 8 or 10 rows of squares, the same games played by imagining such boards in the air. The board of 8 squares is typically understood to mean Ashtapada, and its companion game played on a board of 10 by 10 squares, Dashapada. 18 games were mentioned in all. If you're curious, the Buddha also frowns upon throwing dice, games with balls, hitting a short stick with a long one, playing with toy windmills, and turning somersaults. Some scholars have speculated that Ashtapada was originally a dice game, that is, not a board game played with dice, but a straight-up gambling game. The board is explained as a stakes board or a sort of roulette board where you would place bets and collect based on the roll of the dice. However, it strikes me as odd that the Dialogues of the Buddha would mention separately games of 8-sided boards and throwing dice. But it's certainly possible that Ashtapada started as a dice game and the board was later repurposed for a race game. We know that over time, Ashtapada fell out of favor as other games grew in popularity, including Parchisi and Chaturanga, a very early predecessor of modern-day chess. However, even after people stopped playing Ashtapada, the word Ashtapada became synonymous with any 8x8 board that was used for gaming. I've read that in some regions of India, chessboards still have squares marked with X's as a remnant of the Ashtapada board, even though these marked spaces play no part in today's game of chess. But I haven't been able to independently verify that. In fact, one of the bigger challenges in researching ancient games, for me at least, is tracking down and validating different citations. Now, don't get me wrong, the internet has made this process 1,000 times easier, but there's still some frustration. For example, I was reading a 2016 paper titled Antiquity of Indian Board Games, A New Approach. The author starts out by stating 3 conclusions about the game of chess. 1. Chess is a descendant of an Indian game. 2. Chess was the invention of a Hindu who devised a game of war with the Ashtapada board as his field of battle. And 3. Chess was a result of a prolonged evolution which is difficult to trace. Naturally, number 2 caught my eye. The citation for this reference was Taylor, War in Ancient India. So I looked it up. The 1944 book says, according to Taylor, the game of chess was the invention of some Hindu who devised a game of war with the Ashtapada board as his field of battle. So just a regurgitation of the first reference. Also confusing because Taylor isn't the author of War in Ancient India. His work is just referenced. However, this book much more helpfully cites Anthropology, 1882, page 307. So great. An even older reference that includes a page number. After searching in vain for a magazine titled Anthropology, my wife helped me find Anthropology, An Introduction to the Study of Man and Civilization by Edward B. Taylor. And there was the reference, starting right on page 307. The great invention in intellectual games may have been made 1,000 years or so ago, when some Hindu, whose name is lost, set to work upon the old draft board and men and developed out of them a war game. Yeah, so once I got there, it became clear that this was just idle speculation from Taylor, nothing supported by facts. Now, that's disappointing, but what's worse is that the well-respected game historian H.J.R. Murray picks up this language in his seminal 1978 book, A History of Board Games Other Than Chess. He writes, "The board contains 8x8 cells. It was on this board that the inventor of chess arranged his game, and the Indian chessboard to this day preserves the cross-cut cells of the Ashtapada board." This speculation from Taylor changed to a definitive statement from Murray, and who knows how many others since have taken Murray at face value and repeated this hypothesis as hard fact. Now, I won't lie, I do find the hunt for references like this kind of fun. But it also reinforces my natural skepticism, especially when an author writes about games that are thousands of years old as if they were standing right there to see them played. Ashtapada was first introduced to Europe by Sir Thomas Hyde in his work Two Books on Eastern Games, published in 1694. Hyde, who was the Eastern interpreter to the court for more than 30 years, wrote in Latin, describing the rules and customs of dozens of games from the Middle East, India, China, and other nearby countries. The two-volume set includes the first Western descriptions of Chaturanga, Shogi, Ashtapada, Nard, Tabula, and Go, as well as other games involving dice, betting, and riddles from the Arabic world. One of the most interesting examples of an Ashtapada board I found is the so-called Ashtapada carpet, currently at the Museum of Islamic Art in Doha, Qatar. It's an absolutely beautiful carpet that's 5 foot wide and 12 feet long. Some scholars believe it was owned by Timur, also called Tamerlane, a 14th century conqueror who was reportedly very fond of the game of chess. It's believed that Timur sat on the lotus flower design facing the board woven into the rug. So then, why isn't it called the chess carpet? This is my favorite part of research. Coming across a passage that seems simple but suddenly makes everything make sense. I was reading an article in Hali, the magazine of carpet, textile, and Islamic art, about the Ashtapada carpet. The article goes into incredible detail about the weaving techniques, the materials, the history and provenance of the different motifs in the rug, but this passage really jumped out at me. While we know that Timur played chess, it would certainly be difficult to use upright chess pieces on a board such as this, created on a carpet with high pile. The board couldn't have been used for chess because the pieces would fall over. But the pieces for Ashtapada could be anything, like coins that could sit atop what was essentially a shag carpet. Such a simple leap of logic, but to me it completely clarifies what could and could not be played on such a rug. Now that you know the rules and history of Ashtapada, how do you win? Perhaps the biggest challenge in Ashtapada is that each player is following the same route, but shifted 45 degrees. This can make it really confusing to keep track of which direction all the pieces on the board are moving, especially when you get into the inner tracks. This matters because you want to land on your opponent's pieces and knock them off the board, and you also want to make sure your pieces aren't vulnerable to getting knocked off. Nothing is more frustrating than setting up a genius move only to realize the enemy pieces are moving towards you, not away like you thought. In general, it's smart play to get all your pieces on the board as soon as possible and keep them all active, instead of focusing on advancing a single piece. Since the dice rolls can add up quickly, this gives you more opportunities to strategically advance pieces. Try to space out your pieces across different lanes. This helps avoid having multiple pieces knocked off all in a row as your opponent advances. It also forces the other players to track multiple pieces across multiple paths. Twin your pieces carefully. The only thing that stinks more than having a piece knocked off the board is having two pieces knocked off the board at once. Remember, only twins can knock off other twins. And that's Ashtapada. For such a simple game, it can be pretty strategic and challenging. If you want to learn more about the rules, history, and strategy of ancient games, please like and subscribe. I put out new videos every week. And if there's a specific ancient game you'd like to see me cover, leave a comment, let me know. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on The Gaming.